a year ago. And so we are online. I understand we are meeting someone. Is it Veronique? Veronique, and it's 10:30 where she's at. So if you all want to say hi to Veronique. Sure. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Connie.
Thanks so much, Roger, for the introduction, and thanks to the Flint Hills chapter of Phi Delta Kappa, and thanks to all of you for making time in your schedule to come this afternoon. And because we may have one or more colleagues from France with a 7-hour time difference watching, je vous dis bonsoir tout le monde. Okay? The rest will be in English. Et bonjour, Véronique. This session is based on my sabbatical experiences last fall at the University of Paris Descartes, which was an incredible experience. Today I'll share findings based on my study of how the French prepare teachers to work with gifted learners, provide psychological support services to them, and parent gifted children as advocates in the school system. We'll approach these topics with a great deal of movement through the country, so if you thought you were just hearing about education, surprise, you're going to see a lot of scenery along the way. So this will also reflect my overall sabbatical experience, so I'll try to fit it all in. I'm Connie Phelps, and I'm the Director of Gifted Education and Associate Professor in the Department of Elementary Education, Early Childhood, and Special Education in the Teachers College at Emporia State University. Prior to my work at ESU, I taught middle school gifted education in the Wichita Public Schools in Kansas. I served the profession through the Kansas Association for Gifted, Talented, and Creative, the National Association for Gifted Learners, and World Council for Gifted and Talented Learners. These experiences all contributed in some sense of preparation for the sabbatical, which was my 5th trip to Paris since 2003. So, here we are with the metaphor of Tour de France, which was organized in 1903 as the world's most prestigious bicycle competition. For 3 rugged weeks, bicyclists from around the world compete with 3 stages and more than 2,000 miles. While the route varies each summer, it does include a mountain stage through the Alps and the Pyrenees, and concludes with a circuit in Paris down the fashionable Rue de Rivoli on the north side of the Louvre, past the Tuileries garden created by Catherine de' Medici in 1564, and around the Place de la Concorde, where the guillotine stood during the Reign of Terror, and finally down the Avenue de Champs-Élysées toward the Arc de Triomphe. My tour consisted of 105 days with more than 3,500 miles of travel in France through some of the same cities, which are noted in bold print there. So you can see which ones I went to with the bold, whoops, sorry about that, learning to use the clicker. So these here are the same cities as would have been in last summer's Tour de France. Okay? So, like the Tour de France, my work extended far past the capital city into France, where I visited public and private schools, stayed in homes with parents and their gifted children, and observed psychological practitioners at work in a national hospital for gifted children. The presentation covers 6 regions in France and 1 foreign country, which is also typical of the Tour de France. I hope this tour will increase your awareness of France in its educational system, psychological services for children, and parent advocacy. So we'll begin in Paris, which is in the region called Ile-de-France, and you can kind of keep up with the map there, which is showing little stars. So the big star in the middle is Paris, and the region of that would be called Ile-de-France. Paris emerged from a settlement to a walled cathedral city in the 12th century, located in the Ile-de-France on the Seine River. The Ile-de-France is one of 27 administrative regions in France. More than 12 million people live in about a 6 by 6 mile city center with 20 administrative districts that are known as arrondissements. Those spiral out outward from the city center. Actually, there's 342 arrondissements in France. For example, this picture was taken from my studio apartment in the Cité Universitaire in Montmartre, or what's known as the 14th, on the left bank of the Seine River. Much like its iconic but much shorter tower to the northwest, Tour Montparnasse in the 14th provides a commanding view of the city. Some Parisians consider it the most beautiful in the city because one is unable to see the tower itself from there. My tour began in the Latin Quarter on the left bank in the 5th arrondissement, where I stayed on the Rue des Carmes in what's called a studette, or a very small studio apartment, designated for researchers and limited to 1 month in duration, which I managed to stretch to 5 weeks. This ideal location proved centrally positioned for my studies during a 4-week Cours de Civilisation Française de la Sorbonne, otherwise known as CCFS. Founded in 1257 with students who studied theology and spoke Latin, the Sorbonne is known as Paris 4, and it is one of 13 universities that comprise the University of Paris. My CCFS classes met in 3 different buildings in the 5th and 6th arrondissements on the left bank. In the mornings, classes met in this building in the 6th, which is a former Hôtel Particulier, a grand kind of townhouse with a courtyard and garden privately owned by a nobleman in the 18th century. Notice the large windows and high ceilings, which made me glad that our daily 2-hour classes were scheduled in the morning. You can see my professor reflected in the mirror. Although he earned 2 doctorates in literature, we primarily studied grammar mixed with short discussions on civilization and short readings in literature. The professor assigned daily homework, which we reviewed in class the next day. Students attended from most European countries and parts of Asia. There were just 2 of us from the United States. The course prepared students to pass French language examinations required for university study, and in my case, improved my language skills for the sabbatical. The CCFS course included 10 hours of phonetics instruction located in a second building in the 5th arrondissement near Saint-Julien-de-Pauvre, a church constructed in the 13th century. While English has stressed syllables, the French chain their words together and place the accent at the end of a phrase or sentence. Without enchantement, which pushes consonants at the end of a word forward to the next word, as in this class where she's showing us with all those markings, the French have great difficulty understanding speakers from other languages trying to speak French. 3 afternoons a week, we were encouraged to attend 3 hours of lectures on film, literature, art, history, or other topics, which meant a trek up a steep hill past the Pantheon in the 5th. The 3 lecture hours progressed from less difficult to more advanced and were taught by experts from their respective fields, which mercifully often included PowerPoints. After 6 hours in classes, I returned to my apartment by carefully circling the Pantheon to avoid the myriad of buses and tourists scrambling to take photos of the Saint-Étienne-du-Mont church, where lies Saint Geneviève, the patron saint of Paris. Blaise Pascal and dramatist Jean Racine are buried there too. Our course included a petit exposé, or a short talk in front of the class. I chose the Veldiv roundup of July 16th and 17th, 1942, when the French police arrested 13,152 men, women, and children and held them for several days in the winter bicycle velodrome in Paris before they were railroaded to Auschwitz for the death camp. In 1955, President Jacques Chirac apologized for this travesty, and various monuments and plaques exist to remember. I visited the exhibit on children of the Holocaust at the Hôtel de Ville, or City Hall, and other locations in Paris to ensure authenticity and accuracy for my short lecture. Ill-prepared students received correction in front of the class from the professor. High school and university grades, course grades in France are evaluated on a 20-point scale. 16 to 20 is très bien and rare, like never for a 20, never ever. And then 14 to 15.9 is bien, or A minus. 12 to 13.9 is assez bien, or B plus level, and so on. 10 is average. Academic expectations are very high in France. When our diplomas were distributed, everyone was pretty quiet. Even so, the class prepared me for more in-depth work and travel in France. University classes in France begin in early September, so bolstered with language skills, I settled into my office at the Universite Paris Descartes in the Laboratoire Adaptation Travail Individuel, or LATI, L-A-T-I, with the team for gifted children. Although the main building is located in the 6th, bordered by the Boulevard Saint-Germain, the UFR, Institut de Psychologie, moved to the Centre Henri Péron building just west of Paris in Boulogne-Billancourt. At the same time, I moved to the Cité Université in the 14th, again with researcher status, and in the beautiful Maison de Provence, constructed as student housing for overseas French students. So actually, this building is the main campus that you see here for what's called Paris 4, but where I went was out in the suburb just outside of Paris. My days in Boulogne-Billancourt consisted of sitting in on lectures on creativity by LATI faculty, meetings with lab director Todd Lubart, and Associate Institute Director Maria Pereira da Costa to arrange research travel and lectures that I gave at the Institute. In 2008, I attended an International Center for Innovation in Education, or an ICIE conference, hosted by Paris Descartes in 2008, so the setting was familiar to me. The graduate classes that I attended at the Institute were arranged as seminars coordinated by a faculty member who then contacts other faculty to teach one or more class sessions throughout the semester. By sitting in on the creativity class, I heard 4 faculty members share their expertise on different aspects of creativity. The Institute trains about 3,500 psychology students with 9 specializations for master's and doctoral degrees and hosts 6 psychology research labs. Associated with the Sorbonne, LATI connects their heritage with the research of Alfred Binet and his Binet-Simon intelligence test. I received a warm reception and assistance from faculty and staff at the Institute, which included training in a new assessment in creativity, the Evaluation of Potential Creativity, or EPIC, which was published in 2009. Asta, and I won't attempt to pronounce her last name because she's Icelandic, completed her doctoral studies at the Institute when the LATI group developed the EPIC assessment. Now specializing in psychology for the gifted, she invited me to her cabinet, or her office, where she practices psychology, and she demonstrated use of the WIS-4 with the EPIC test. When I stayed with families of gifted children, I practiced administration of the EPIC assessment, which consists of 8 specific tasks with verbal and graphic modalities that measure integrative and divergent thinking skills. The products are then scored for strengths in originality, flexibility, fluency, and/or elaboration based on norms. This is an example of an integrative graphic task where the child viewed a card with 8 abstract figures and was instructed to draw something original using at least 4 of the forms. The child then gives the drawing a title and points to each of the forms used. So in this case, you can see the title of this one is, in French, it's Le visage et le miroir, or which means the face in the mirror, which seems fairly original. It doesn't look like what most people would do with maybe a triangle and some ovals. in a ladder shape, and maybe circles. Would you draw something like that? I also attended the annual meeting of the French Association for Gifted held in Paris, which was attended primarily by administrators and psychologists, as there are few teachers of the gifted in France. Psychologists often come from the ranks of teachers. There are few schools for gifted in France and few teachers of gifted in public schools. My work at the Institute concluded by delivering the monthly research lecture to the Lati group at the end of October, just before the fall break or 2-week Toussaint holiday when schools close. I packed up my belongings into a rented Ford Fiesta for the last stage of my Tour de France, 10 days, more than 1,500 miles in a Ford Fiesta, a purchased GPS, and overnight stays with 3 French families. So now we'll go to another stage. If that was a time trial in Paris, now we're going into the mountain stage here, and you can see that this region is called the Rhone Alps. So that's the famous Rhone River, and also the Alps. So there's one representation of that area, which, as you can see, looks quite different from Paris. Chambéry in the French Alps is about 3 hours by train, and Grenoble about another hour and a half by car. My first host, Véronique, trained as a médecin scolaire, or school doctor, who then became an administrative director of service for the Savoie department in France. There are 96 departments in France, and 5 more are overseas. Véronique arranged visits at a middle school and high school related to gifted education during 2 trips I made to the Rhone Alps region, in addition to providing hospitality at her beautiful home with her family. During my second visit to the Rhone Alps region, I traveled to Grenoble to meet Véronique, where she attended an administrative meeting and managed to enjoy a visit to the Museum of the Mountain Troops and the historic La Bastille, which was important during World War I and the resistance of World War II. Some of the great French skiers honed their skills as mountain soldiers. The Savoie department claims as favorites such persons as Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who fled Geneva and discovered his love of nature in Chambéry. School and family visits in the Savoie put my hopefully improved French language skills to the test, with conversations with administrators, school staff, teachers, students, family members, conducted entirely in French. At least I made the effort, and I found my hosts were gracious and welcoming. The French traced the development of the traditional educational system to Napoleon as a highly centralized and organized system with primary, secondary, and higher education based on merit and designed to prepare the elite to run the country and the military. The modern education system is based on laïcité, the separation of church and state, and credited to statesman Jules Ferry in the 19th century. Jules Ferry laws provide free public education, which is compulsory for primary and secondary, and replace the clergy from public schools with laypersons. While at Jules Ferry College, which means a middle school, I taught an English class as a guest lecturer, and I found that many French think of America as New York, or maybe Washington, or possibly California, without much else in between it all. Imagine that telling them about Kansas. Fortunately, we have Le Magicien d'Oz, or the Wizard of Oz, to help them locate the Midwest. The educational system begins with pre-maternelle at age 2, and in France, it's expected. that young children are going to go. I don't think it's actually required, but they do it. And even expatriates in France are pretty much expected to do that, which is sometimes difficult for those expats from America. Then there's something called the École Maternelle, which would be preschool for ages 3 through 5. Then the cycle elementary, I'm going to not say it the French way, okay? Which begins with the 11th grade. Okay, so their system is kind of upside down from the way we talk about it. It's the reverse. So it starts, the elementary system starts with the 11th grade and it ends with the 7th grade, or those are ages 6 through 10. Secondary education, which would be the first cycle of collège or middle school, starts with the 6th grade and it concludes with the 3rd grade for ages 11 through 14 or maybe 15. And in this class, which is a collège class in Chambéry, I observed a project-based science classroom with gifted learners in there. So this is actually pretty unusual, this type of class. And that's why Maria at Paris Descartes actually thought that this would be a good place for me to visit, because Veronique's work as an administrator to support gifted education in the schools. So one person can make a difference, and she's in charge of that administrative area. So, and the reason that it's so unusual is that everybody studies the same thing in every grade at the same time everywhere in France. So to have more of an inquiry-based type of learning is unusual. And I was privileged to join this particular class at Jules Ferry Collège. And you can see that they're having a good time too. Okay? Jules Ferry is one of few schools with organized services for gifted students. In France, the gifted are identified only by intelligence test scores. The gifted facilitator at Jules Ferry emerged from the ranks of classroom teachers and secured professional development training to provide challenging instructional services for middle school gifted students. Laurent constructs independent studies for them and uses classic techniques such as Renzulli's curriculum compacting. This method determines what students already know in order to replace that instructional time with more appropriate learning at the student's academic level. And here we're at Veronique's home, and you can see that we have just finished, maybe you can't tell that we just enjoyed an authentic fondue. Remember, this is the Alps region. And Laurent is the person over there on the left of the screen. And the principals are also, the young gal in the red shirt is one of the principals, and the person across from her is the principal. And Veronique's husband is down at the end of the table helping with the fondue. So, okay, so this school, as you can see from the pictures, the Lycée Technique Galilée. So this is an academy with general and technical studies and professional studies emphases. Those are two different kinds of studies. This school was concerned, this would be high school, and they were concerned about students in their school who were having difficulty in terms of high ability but not having appropriate instruction for that. So the school invited Veronique and Laurent to come out and do an all-day workshop there. Veronique asked me to join them, so I went too, and so that's kind of a second trip that I have there. So to give you a little information about secondary education, by the time we get to the 12th grade, well, that section is called terminal, like terminal high school. I know you have to get used to the word terminal. Just means the end of something. It doesn't have any fatalistic kind of connotation to it. So at a high school, which starts with the 10th grade, that would be, kind of counting down, would be the second level. The 11th is the première, level. And finally, 12th grade is the terminal, the terminal level. The lycée is divided usually into 3-year tracks that are specialized for the baccalaureate, followed by le bac, or the bac, which is another Napoleonic tradition. And that permits graduates from the high school to enter public universities such as the Sorbonne. However, to enter the Grande Écoles, students study in a 2-year preparatory, or what's called a prepa, program to enter what's called the Grande École. So, in other words, there's a lot of pressure at the high school because first of all, they have to decide which track they're going to go into. Then they have to maintain, if they're in the baccalaureate track, they have to maintain their learning through high school because at the end, there's several parts to the baccalaureate test, but if they don't pass, then they're not going to college, not even a public university, okay? So, so the Grande Écoles are more that Napoleonic tradition of the elite. So most of, like for instance, most of the French presidents, I think Sarkozy maybe wasn't a Grande École graduate. There was some discussion about whether or not he would, you know, was really making the grade there, maybe because of that. But the Grande Écoles, those direct people into government or maybe industry, leading the country. So if a student wants to do more than go to a university, then they actually spend time in another training program, as I said, about 2 years. And they have to, I believe, pass another test in order to enter the Grande Écoles. So there's a whole nother set of tests after that if they want to go that direction into what's called the Grande Écoles, or the really elite schools, okay? So my visit in schools usually took place on Wednesdays because France has a 4-day school week. These teachers at the high school attended voluntarily, and the Chambéry team of Véronique and Laurent presented in-depth information about working with the gifted. And I also presented a short section, of course, in French. So this was a very comprehensive presentation that Véronique led, and these were very committed teachers who didn't have to be there that day, but they came because they wanted to learn more about gifted education. All right, so now we've been to 2 of 7 of the points on the trip, and the next point is to the southeast, way over, actually that little red star at the bottom should be a little further east, right on the border of Italy. And this is Nice, which is in the region of Provence-Alpes, Côte d'Azur, okay? The next stop on my tour was actually the first in the reality of my trip after I left Paris. Nice is about a 10-hour car trip, 10-hour drive from Paris, which I managed with an overnight stop in Lyon, the capital of French haute cuisine and the place where the Lumiere brothers pioneered filmmaking and the birthplace of the puppet Guignol. Nice is the 5th largest city in France and rests between the Alps and the Mediterranean Sea. My host for Nice was Monique Binda, the former president of ANPEP, a federation of parents who advocate for gifted students. Since this stage of the journey occurred during the Toussaint holiday, I visited a private school, a psychology clinic, and discussed issues with Monique. The private school is run by Rosette Bousquet. Private schools can receive financial aid from the government, which means that they can more easily differentiate curriculum for gifted learners and other students who may need different types of curriculum. Using special education techniques to reach a wide variety of special needs students, including the gifted, and you can see that there's advanced instruction here on the board. So this is in a school. There were no students present, but I was able to interview Rosette for a period of time, and learn more about her school. This is my hostess, Monique Binda. It looks like the A on that, maybe had a little trouble. And Jean-Charles Terrassier, that's not a French spelling. Looks like a typo. So sorry about that, Monique. Monique, I have met before at a world conference, and this is actually my second visit to Monique. And she is a hostess extraordinaire. Jean-Claude Terrassier started ANPEP, the parent advocacy group, which is all over France. And he specializes in counseling. He's a clinical psychologist. He coined several terms in psychology, such as the reverse Pygmalion effect. And he has literally counseled thousands of gifted students through his practice. ANPEP is the organization I've been telling you about, and I took this from their webpage and translated it, so hopefully it's a fairly good description of that. The Federation of ANPEP is encouraged in its information campaign, awareness, and expertise by professionals. It's 40 years old. Actually, I think it's 41 years old now, and they have groups all over France. They do training, they do research, they write letters to administrators or to legislators. They're very active. And Monique, even though she's no longer president, spends a lot of her day, every day, working on the behalf of gifted students in France. My next stop is in the same region as the Côte d'Azur, Provence. And I just stayed over the night there on my way to my next stop with a clinical psychologist that I met at the annual Conference of Gifted Teachers in Paris. And she invited me to stay with her because she had a gifted son and a young daughter. So I enjoyed hospitality there, and I practiced more with the EPIC test with them and visited with her a little bit more about gifted and her practice. In France, there's not so much educational psychology. That's not really something that's used in Europe, but differential psychology, which studies the way that individuals differ in their behavior. Individual differences typically research personality, motivation, intelligence, ability, IQ, interests, self-concept, values, self-efficacy, and self-esteem. So you can see that gifted fits very well within differential psychology, which would be pretty much the psychology that would be taught at a lot of universities in France. I also stayed with another family on my way back to Paris. So now I'm coming up on the west side, as you can see, in Chinon. But in reality, I'm staying near Toulouse with a family there. Hélène, who worked with Monique and ANPEP, does teacher education. Again, more or less in private schools because they have more freedom to do that. And to tell you a little bit more about teacher preparation, decades ago, primary teachers were conducted in école normale. Like, you know, Emporia State was a normal school, okay? And secondary teachers through the aggregation examination or concours. In 1950, the process was diversified with what's called the CAPES or CAPES examination for secondary teachers. Then by 1990, the institutes, Universite Formation de Maître, in other words, teacher training institutes, provided training for elementary and secondary teachers. And so secondary teachers, education teachers, can now either take the CAPES or the aggregation. And once they do that, they can either teach middle school or high school. Still seeing some scenery here, which this happens to be the graves of Richard the Lion-Hearted and Eleanor of Aquitaine. So I'm just going to talk about teacher education while you look at that because I think it's more interesting than a chart. Teachers who had passed qualifying exams are considered to be civil servants or functionaries, like functionaries. This means that once you have a job, you are employed for life. Well, you can see right now where that could be a problem in schools. Because if you are granted a job and you more or less have it for life, there's no real incentive for professional development. You don't have to do any more. And this is very aggravating to people that want to see advanced training and more for students like gifted, because there's really no way that these teachers are going to leave their posts. The only way that they do leave their posts is if they voluntarily leave or the position just closes. And even then, the government has to find them another position. Curiously, if a teacher, unlike us in America, if a teacher does leave the position for a period of time, that teacher has to go back and retake the qualifying exams. Just a little bit more scenery. Saint-Malo, which now we're moving up into Brittany for one of the last stops on the trip. And this is the land of Crips. They're very famous there. And another area, because the river runs through, this is really close to the ocean. So you have mussels and fries. That's a very, very popular dish there. There's a lot of medieval architecture there, as you can see. And of course, this is probably the third most, one of the top 3 tourist attractions in France, which is Mont Saint-Michel, which is really awesome. And yes, I climbed all the way to the top. This is a quote from Victor Hugo, who initiated a campaign to dredge the water there, because when the tide goes out, it's an island. And of course, so there's always silt building up there. So even now, if you go there, you'll see a lot of machinery out in the water dredging it. And they're trying to do something more permanent than this dredging thing. But it's quite an awesome, since I was that close in Brittany, I really wanted to see Mont Saint-Michel. All right, so the last actual visit that I had was in a hospital for gifted. And it's called CNAHP, or the National Center to Help Children and Adolescents of High Potential. So that's kind of a literal translation of that. And the idea is to make a difference as a source, to translate this tagline a little bit below the eyes, to make a difference whether to flourish or thrive or face isolation instead of isolation. So it's actually a national hospital, which is, I don't know of any other national hospitals for gifted. The person who's in charge of it is actually the lab director's wife, Todd's wife. So Sylvie, his wife, is a psychiatrist, and she got this going. She has a lot of other hospital units in Brittany that she's in charge of, but this is one of them. So I spent 2 days there, and I don't have any pictures, obviously, of inside the clinic, but I was really privileged to sit in on a almost all afternoon case study of an applicant. They have a waiting list almost a year long. They have about 17 different professionals who sit and all bring their expertise as therapists to that meeting. And I also sat through an art therapy session and gave some little mini conference talks to the staff there myself. So you can see these are some of the therapies that they use there. And I think this is very intriguing and literally unheard of. So quite an interesting experience to do that. Okay, like the Tour de France, it goes to another country. Part of my sabbatical, I went to the ACHA, or European Council of High Ability Conference, which meets every 2 years. And that was in Munster in Germany, which has also got a lot of history to it. And so I saw some gifted colleagues there that I've met at other conferences. Then I returned to France. One of the last stops, can you guess where this is? Some of you may know. It's a very famous garden. And in the summertime, they play music, which I had never heard before, because when I was there in 2003, it was just way too hot. Well, this is Versailles. And when you go through the gardens of Versailles in the summer, They have music that is just, I just have trouble describing that. It's just so amazing as you walk through these huge gardens and classical music is playing, and then this one is more timed. So some of them are a little more theatrical than others. Then back to Paris. This is another reminder of the heritage that's in France and in Paris in particular. This is the dome, the famous dome at the Galeries Lafayette, which is quite beautiful. It's 100 years old now. Doesn't look that old, does it? And then finally, it looks like the slide is doing something strange here. This is where I lived in the 14th. And I came out of my apartment one day and I faced this. So what's this all about? Well, this is President of France, and they were doing a filming. More than once I was stopped for filming in Paris. And the French love to mock. So they had all these puppets, more than the president here. And they were mocking, doing something with that. So, you know, as I sum things up, you know, you have to know the country you're going to. You have to know their laws. You have to know something about their culture. I think most of all, you have to speak French. You have to, whatever country you're in, speak as much of the language as you can. I think my experience was really awesome because I tried, you know, and there were days at a time that I only spoke French. So I'm sure there were hundreds, countless errors that I made. But the fact that I tried, I was very well received. And I found the people very warm and friendly. And I also found that the people in France know a whole lot about us. And if you recall, well, you may not recall, but when I came back on November 6th. So all of France was talking about who's going to be elected, you know, and I turned on the radio because that's what I did when I was driving in that little Ford Fiesta. I practiced my French even more by listening to the radio. And what I heard frequently, especially as the election came up, was, Obama, yes we can, you know, and they love to say, yes we can. They really like Obama over there. I don't know what they think about him right now, but the poster says, a second chance. So they're very tuned in to what's going on in America. And I think we would be appalled if a foreigner came to our country and expected us to know everything about their country and speak their language. So I'm just saying that it made a huge difference. The effort was worthwhile. And without trying as much as I did, and I'm far from perfect, it would have been a totally different experience. So I feel very, very grateful to all those who helped me. Remerciement, that's what that means. That's my gratitude to the Research and Grants Department, which provided the grant for the travel around France. It didn't provide for the Paris part, but it did for the Tour de France part. The Teachers College, and also, of course, the Universite Paris Descartes and the Lati Lab. Very grateful for Monique, who arranged so many meetings for me on her time. She was so generous with her time and so gracious with her hospitality in her beautiful home, which overlooks the Mediterranean, by the way. With Asta, who's a psychologist, and she gave up her time with a full schedule to help train me an EPIC and help me see some comparisons with the WISC. And Veronique, who did the same thing in the Alps of setting up meetings for me. And finally, for the opportunity to visit the Hospital for Gifted, which I don't think I mentioned, but is in, I said it was in Brittany, but it's in the city of Rennes. And also, to some of my family, I don't know if this really matters or not, but my grandfather was in World War I in France, and I'm very proud that I feel like that America and France, we are friends, and we've been friends for a very long time. And we helped them, and they helped us. And that's a friendship that is really important. In fact, my That's a picture my grandmother took when he went over and he fought in the Ardennes, which was a really tough battle. And we believe that his life was probably shortened as a result of some mustard gas. My dad, on the other hand, probably had it easier. He was stationed in Paris. So I started speaking a little tiny bit of French from a very early age when he would teach me simple little phrases, because he was stationed there at the hospital, which today is called Hospital Clichy, but during the war was called Hospital Beaujon. And finally, part of my experience was brought forward because of this organization, which is called the International Center for Innovation in Education. And Todd Lubart, who is the director of the Lati Lab, is very involved in that. And also Tizir, I won't try to pronounce his last name, who helps coordinate the conference. Todd is actually the conference coordinator. But the next one is is the summer, July 7th through the 10th in Paris. And I actually have a perk. I'm welcome to come, free of registration. And more than that, which is even better, I can bring someone with me for half price of the registration. So if you are interested in going to Paris, I would love you to go. And this is a conference, as you can see, is very broad. Yes, it's a lot for gifted, but it's a lot about creativity. There's also an applied psychology conference that's running concurrently with it in the afternoon. But you can see that school heads, graduate students, parents, caretakers, university academics. So if that sort of interests you, let me know. And I can see some smiles out there because we'd have to get our proposals in by May 30th. So that concludes my presentation, and I am so grateful for your being here. And if you have questions, this would be a good time.
Question about the hospital for the gifted.
Yes, Marla.
Why do they have a hospital for the gifted?
That's a good question, and I kind of skipped over that. I think these are probably seriously compressed, or otherwise, I don't know which word I want to use as an adjective for that, but we'll just say, they usually just say children with serious difficulties. So maybe that would be suicidal. So they're referred, and there's a long waiting list. And they're very thorough, as I indicated to you. It's a great question, but it's singular in its existence, as far as I know. Thank you. Let's see, somebody else.
I'm just wondering what you learned about the fee structure for public versus private higher education and the Grand
That's a
École.
great question. Yeah, there's so much that could be said, and I felt like I was kind of bringing everything in as it was. That's a great question because because of the socialistic government in France and a free education. That's certainly true at the primary and secondary levels, but also it's largely supported at the higher education level. So, and I think that there's kind of a, maybe even a reverse perk to that in the sense of other people who come to study there, if they meet certain criteria, sometimes they can kind of cash in on that too. In other words, their tuition is almost free. It's very low for their public universities. The Grand École would be another matter. Good question. Carol.
Two questions. One, dual diagnosis kind of thing. If you have an individual who was gifted and also has some other kinds of special needs, was there much?
That's another great question, and I know from previous studies. In 2008, or I guess it was 2007, I visited Monique in Nice in her home, and she brought in many professionals who were there all day. We had conversations, you name the professional, medical types of professionals. So there's a lot of collaboration within ANPEP, and I know that it would be Monique's position in particular. I probably wouldn't agree with this in America, but in France, she feels that the door is through special education. And in fact, that's the only legal way that gifted currently do, I mean legal, that's the only existing channel for gifted in France is to have a disability type of exceptionality because then they can have services. Then the gifted can be addressed at the same time. So that's really a great question.
Every question was accessibility. What was accessibility?
Oh, I love that question. Okay, let me think how to say this. France, I really, this is an area I really am curious about, Carol, because if you have baggage, I'll give a personal example here rather than a school example. If you have baggage on the metro or train or wherever, in other words, you're going up and down stairs, you're gonna have to look long and hard to find an elevator. I mean, a lot of times there are escalators and sometimes there are elevators, but in general, I would have to say it's low. And in the schools, I inquired about that during my Sorbonne class, and you get kind of blank stares. I know it exists because when I was looking up the licensures, there is a licensure for special ed, both at the elementary, or I suppose it's something like an endorsement, at the elementary and secondary levels. So there is, they do address that in the schools, but it has not nearly the type of power that it does in the United States. And as a society, you don't see accessibility everywhere. And I don't know, again, if that's because the antiquity of some of it, They have a lot of really old buildings that are part of the patrimony, they've been recognized as a heritage site and so on. So of course they wouldn't, they'd be very careful about that. But that's really a good question, and I think it, in my opinion, it's less than adequate. Other questions? I was afraid I was going to run out of time. There's so much to say about this, and if you have a question some other time, I'd be happy to talk with you. Roxanne?
How are these children viewed in school? Because singling out children is always a little problematic with special ed when you have children who are a little slower. Excuse my terminology, I'm not in teacher's ed. How are these gifted children, since there's a hospital for them, so I'm assuming that they also have psychological problems sometimes because of their giftedness.
Yeah, and I apologize I didn't repeat the earlier questions, but the question was how are children viewed, pretty much, and that's another great question that I wish I addressed earlier. Again, from some of my experiences, I was in several homes where there were children. On the next day was school, even though I may have been there on a Wednesday, Thursday's a school day. So what I noticed was it's really, I think, pretty typical for parents to sit down at the table after dinner with their children's homework, and maybe before dinner. In other words, remember I told you all the pressure for the back? You have to understand, France is a different kind of society, even though maybe we feel that we understand them in a lot of ways as a Western European culture. They really, they have specific expectations of behavior, and they have specific types of expectations of achievement. And so for families where maybe the child's expecting to go on in the baccalaureate track in high school, they study really hard. And the parents help them. And it's not like a shame, like here in the United States, my daughter would never consider me helping her. And there, it's very acceptable and almost like maybe the kid needs that kind of help, and the kid needs that kind of support from the parents, and they freely give it. And it just happens as it happened when I was there in with the two families that had school the next day, it happened in both of them. So what I'm trying to say is that I think that sometimes that pressure is too much for kids. You know, it can be, and then they need support, and maybe extra support through something like a psychologist, a cabinet, somebody in a cabinet, or maybe the hospital. Okay. And by the way, the hospital is outpatient treatment, so they go in, they have diagnoses, and then they're referred back. So it's not an on-site type of arrangement. Did that answer your question a little bit? Okay, that's all great questions.
Show our appreciation for So that concludes this month's PDK Teacher Service Series. And we had one for November. We have to reschedule the date.
October.
October.
It'll be the end of October.
End of October, there'll be another one. So Lucy will send out all that information. So again, Connie, thank you very, very much. This is very good.